The Whitmore Arms had stood on the corner of Larkspur and Ninth for over a century, a limestone building with wrought iron balconies, a marble lobby, and a chandelier that had been imported from Vienna the year the building was built. It was the kind of address people mentioned at dinner parties, the kind of place where rent alone could swallow a modest salary whole, and every single tenant in that building believed Wren Ashford didn't belong there. She was 34, quiet, and unremarkable in all the ways that mattered to the people who lived above the third floor. She wore the same navy blue sweater dress to nearly every tenant function, paired with a plain silver watch that had belonged to her grandmother. She didn't drive a car worth mentioning. She didn't summer anywhere. She worked from a laptop at the corner cafe most mornings, and when neighbors asked what she did, she gave vague, unbothered answers. Bookkeeping, she'd say. Property things, and then she'd smile and change the subject. Nobody pressed further, because nobody thought it was worth their time. Camille Whitfield thought about it plenty, though. Camille was the president of the Tenant Association, a role she'd assigned herself 3 years earlier and defended since with the ferocity of someone guarding a throne. She lived in the building's largest unit, the one with the wraparound terrace, and she had opinions about everyone, especially about the woman in Foresee, who paid her modest rent on time every month and asked for nothing. "I don't understand how she affords it," Camille said one evening, swirling wine in the clubroom before the building's annual holiday tenant meeting. She said it to no one in particular, which was her way of saying it to everyone. That unit isn't cheap. She must have some arrangement, a subsidy, a favor from someone. The women around her, Della from the 5th floor, Priscilla from the penthouse, nodded along the way people do when they've already decided something is true and are simply waiting for confirmation. "Maybe she's someone's mistress," Della offered, delighted with herself. "Maybe she's behind on payments and the building just hasn't caught up yet," Priscilla said. "You know how these older buildings are. Paperwork gets lost." Camille smiled into her glass. "Well, we'll find out tonight, won't we?" Emery said there's a lease matter to discuss. Emery Voss was the building manager, a tired, careful man in his 50s, who had worked at the Whitmore Arms for 11 years, and had learned, in that time, to keep his opinions to himself. He stood near the doorway of the clubroom now, checking his watch, waiting for the last few tenants to arrive before the meeting began. He caught Wren's eye as she slipped in quietly and took a seat near the back, and something in his expression, a flicker of amusement, quickly hidden, suggested he knew something the room didn't. Wren settled into her chair with a cup of tea. She'd poured herself in the small kitchen off the lobby. She didn't say much. She rarely did in these meetings. She listened as Camille called the room to order, ran through updates about the elevator maintenance schedule and the new recycling policy, and then arrived, with visible relish, at the final item on the agenda. "There's been some concern," Camille said, "about a tenant whose lease status may need clarification. I've asked our building attorney to join us tonight to address it." Given the circumstances, a man rose from a chair near the front. Silas Holbrook, gray-suited, a leather folio tucked under one arm, the kind of quiet gravity about him that made rooms fall silent without him raising his voice. He'd represented the Whitmore Arms for nearly 2 decades. He set the folio on the small podium and opened it without hurry. "Thank you, Camille," he said. "I understand. There's been some speculation about the financial standing of certain residents." His eyes moved briefly across the room. "I'd like to put that speculation to rest." Camille straightened, clearly expecting the moment she'd been anticipating. "As of this evening," Silas continued, "I'm required, per the terms of the ownership transfer completed 18 months ago, to formally disclose to all tenants the identity of the Whitmore Arms sole proprietor. This was previously held under a private holding entity for administrative reasons. That arrangement has now concluded." He turned a page. "The building and every lease within it, including each of yours, is held in the name of Wren Ashford." The room did not move for a long moment. Somewhere near the back, a teacup settled gently into its saucer. Camille laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "I'm sorry, I think there's been some confusion. Wren lives in Foresee. She's a tenant." "She was," Silas said, "for the first 2 years, before the purchase. Miss Ashford acquired the Whitmore Arms 18 months ago through a private sale and elected, for reasons that are entirely her own, to remain in her original unit and continue living among the tenants, as she always had. Her name has been on every lease renewal since, including yours. Miss Whitfield, I believe you signed yours in March. Camille's wineglass had gone very still in her hand. Wren said nothing. She sat with her tea, her expression unreadable, watching the room absorb what it had just been told. It was Della who finally spoke, her voice smaller than it had been all evening. But she wears the same dress to everything. I like that dress, Wren said. It was the first thing she'd said all night, and the quiet certainty in her voice landed harder than any speech could have. Silas allowed himself the faintest smile and continued. For those wondering about the mechanics, Miss Ashford's late father, Everett Ashford, built a modest property management portfolio over 30 years. Much of it unglamorous, unremarkable work, walk-up buildings, small retail units, nothing anyone at this table would have noticed. When he passed 6 years ago, Miss Ashford inherited that portfolio and quietly expanded it, one careful acquisition at a time, while working full-time as a bookkeeper to fund the early purchases herself. The Whitmore Arms was, by her own account, the one building she'd always admired from the outside. When it came up for sale, she bought it. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't need to. Camille's mouth opened, then closed. The wine in her glass had gone untouched for the last 5 minutes, which for Camille was its own kind of confession. Why, she finally managed. Would you live here like this if you own the whole building? Wren considered the question with the same unhurried patience she brought to everything. Because I wanted to know what it was actually like to live here, she said. Not as an owner reviewing complaints on a spreadsheet, but as a person waiting for the elevator with everyone else. I wanted to know if the heat really did go out on the 4th floor every February. I wanted to know if the noise complaints about 6B were fair. She glanced briefly toward a tenant near the window, who suddenly found his shoes very interesting. Mostly, I wanted to know if the people who lived here were kind to someone they didn't think mattered. The clubroom was silent except for the low hum of the space heater in the corner. I didn't buy this building to be someone people were afraid of, Wren continued. I bought it because my father used to point at it when I was a little girl and tell me that someday, if I worked hard enough and stayed patient enough, buildings like that one could belong to people like us. Not because we inherited a name, because we paid attention, because we showed up and kept showing up, long after anyone was watching. She looked, at last, directly at Camille. I heard what was said about me tonight before the meeting started. The mistress comment, the missed payments comment. I want you to know I wasn't offended. I was mostly just tired of a version of the world where someone's worth gets decided by the dress they wear or the car they don't drive. She paused. I'm not going to raise anyone's rent because of tonight. I'm not vindictive, and I don't need to be. I own the building. That was never something I needed you to know. You made it something I needed to say. Emery, standing near the door, allowed himself a small, private smile. He had known for 18 months. He had watched Wren personally review every maintenance request, quietly approve repairs. Camille had been denied for months under the previous ownership, and never once take credit for it. He had watched her fix the 4th floor heating issue Della had complained about for 2 winters, fixed within a week of the sale, though nobody had ever connected the timing. There is one more thing, Silas said, closing his folio. Effective this month, Miss Ashford has authorized a modest renovation of the building's common spaces, the lobby, the laundry room, the courtyard garden, funded entirely from the building's own reserves. No special assessments required. She asked me to mention that the funds have been available for over a year. She was simply waiting to see if anyone would ask how the building could afford it, the way they'd asked how she could. No one had asked. The meeting ended not long after. The agenda items about elevator, maintenance, and recycling policies suddenly feeling very far away. Tenants filed out in 2s and 3s, murmuring in low voices, casting glances back toward the woman in the navy sweater dress, who was quietly gathering her teacup and coat. Camille lingered by the door as the room emptied, working up to something. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost all its earlier polish. "I owe you an apology," she said. "A real one, not the kind people give when they've been caught." Ren considered her for a moment. "I'd like that," she said simply. "Not because I need it, because I think you mean it." "I do." Camille hesitated. "For what it's worth, the terrace unit. I always assumed it made me the most important person in this building." "It's a beautiful terrace," Ren said, "and there was no cruelty in it at all. I've always liked the view from up there. I used to stand outside your door sometimes on my way to the mailroom, just to look at the sunset through your window." Camille blinked. "You could have taken that unit. It's yours. You own the building." "I know," Ren said, "but 4C has good light in the mornings, and I've grown fond of the crack in the ceiling that looks a little like Ohio. Some things you don't replace just because you can afford to." She said goodnight, pulled on her coat, the same wool coat she'd worn all winter, patched neatly at one elbow, and walked out into the lobby beneath the Vienna chandelier that had watched over the Whitmore Arms for 100 years, entirely unbothered by who did or didn't believe she belonged beneath it. By the following week, the whispers in the building had changed shape entirely. They were no longer about how Ren Ashford could possibly afford her rent. They were about the woman on the 4th floor, who had owned the whole building for 18 months and never once let anyone feel small in her presence. Not before they knew, and not after. Della started saying hello in the elevator. Priscilla left a fresh loaf of bread outside 4C, with a note that simply said, "I'm sorry, and thank you." And Camille, who had spent 3 years running tenant meetings, like a queen presiding over her court, began instead spending her Tuesday evenings volunteering to help Emery coordinate the courtyard garden renovation, not because anyone asked her to, but because it was, she admitted quietly to Ren one evening, the first thing in a long time that had made her feel like she was actually part of something, rather than simply above it. Ren never brought up that first meeting again. She didn't need to. She kept wearing the navy sweater dress. She kept drinking her tea from the same chipped mug. She kept living exactly as she always had, in the modest 4th floor unit with the crack in the ceiling shaped like Ohio, the owner of everything around her, and the quietest person in every room she walked into. Some people spend their whole lives trying to prove they belong somewhere. Ren Ashford had simply waited for the room to catch up to a truth she'd never needed anyone else to confirm.